I'm going to show you how to take this stretchy smocked fabric that you can get at Joann Fabrics and create a back panel in a dress. The name of the technique used to create the stretchy fabric is called shirring. It uses an elastic thread to hold the fabric in place. The pattern I'm using today is the Daphne dress. You can customize the neckline and hem length. Start by bringing in the center back and side back of the bodice. I'm going to start with the center back panel here. It's projected onto my mat. I have my shirred fabric folded in half. This particular fabric stretches to double its width. We're going to take that into account as we cut our pattern piece. Start by measuring the pattern piece at the waist and at the bust. I like to adjust my mat to match up my center back line and grain line. What you want to do is line up the fold of the shirred fabric halfway in the pattern. For me, my pattern piece measured 5 inches at the waist, so I'm lining this up at 2.5 inches from the side seam. Next, you'll choose what part of the shirred fabric you want to be at the waistline. For me, I'm using the last elastic string as my waistline. These patterns include a 5/8 seam allowance, so I'm going to measure up 5/8 from the projected line and slide that elastic panel up so that the last elastic thread is 5/8 of an inch. Once you're happy with your placement, trace the line. I'm going to cut partially down my line because I feel confident about the placement. You can also wait until we draw the rest of the skirt to cut the whole pattern piece. Now that we have the center back piece marked, let's work on the side back piece that will match up to it. As you can see, we won't be able to use the top part since it's higher than our shirred panel. We'll have to adjust the back of the pattern piece to match. I like to use a ruler to line up a straight line across the back of the dress. I'm then going to move my piece out of the way. I have my fabric here folded in half so that I can cut 2 pieces at a time. With my ruler underneath, I can mark the new line. For me, this lines up just under the arm's eye. You may have to adjust this mark on your own pattern depending on the size you chose. Double check the measurements by measuring the shirred panel on that side back seam, then matching it to the side back seam of the piece you're working on. You want it to be the same length plus 5/8 of an inch to account for seam allowance. Once you're happy with your mark, draw a straight line. Take a moment to mark the straps below where they originally were. We can then cut this piece out. Transfer your strap mark to the other side. Because this piece is now a rectangle, I like to mark my side seams so I don't get confused when putting my pieces together. Now that we have our bodice pieces adjusted, we need to adjust the center back skirt piece. Project it onto your mat. We're going to make this a continuous piece from the bottom of the shirring. Line up your marked line with the side seam or the side back seam of the pattern piece you've projected. I put a pin in mine so that you can see it clearly. Just like we did the bodice piece, we need to account for that 5/8 seam allowance. So I'm measuring the 5/8 and lining up that elastic string to that mark. You can see as we go down, the fabric is less gathered, so it can start matching up to the center back seam. Note that this dress has a 5/8 seam allowance in the center back. It's not cut on the fold, but we're going to cut ours on the fold. So leave 5/8 as you're cutting. Here I'm checking that when I pull my elastic waist, it matches up to that center back seam, accounting for the 5/8 seam allowance. Smooth out your gathers before cutting or marking your new line. You can mark it or you can cut it directly depending on how you feel. Now we have our center back panel and skirt as one. Next, you'll need to adjust the facing pattern piece or make a fresh facing for that side back panel. What I like to do is place fabric behind the piece and cut around the 3 edges. Those edges being the side seam, the top, and the side back. Now that it's the same size, I can transfer over the strap markings to that facing. The front facing I'm going to use as a guide. It measures about 2 inches, so I'll do the same on this piece. You can make your facing longer if you'd like. Now I have my center back panel and skirt ready to go, and the side back panel with facing. Here are all the pieces of the dress ready to cut out. I just want to go over which ones are adjusted and which ones aren't. As you can see, the front bodice, center front, side front, facing are all the same. The 3 skirt pieces, center front, and side back are also all the same. Our side back and our side back skirt are now one, and they've been adjusted with that shirred panel, and our side back has been adjusted as well with a newly made facing. Note that the straps may be cut the same, or you'll need to cut them slightly longer to account for the shorter back piece. We can now start assembling the dress. Start with the side back panels, attaching the bodice to the skirt at the waist. Be sure you line up your side seams on both pieces. Pin in place and sew with a 5/8 seam allowance. Now that our pieces are sewn, we're going to attach and place the straps. Use those strap markings as a guide. Pin in place and lay the facing on top. I've already finished the bottom of my facing with a serged edge. You could do a zigzag or fold and stitch. This pattern calls for the facing to be interfaced. However, I'm doing this as just a demonstration, so mine are not. Line up both pieces and pin. Be sure to go through the strap as well to hold it in place as you sew. Backstitch and sew your facing to the side back panel. You'll go over the strap to catch it in place. Now that it's sewn, you can take it to your iron and press that seam with the seam allowance going towards the facing. Once pressed, you can understitch your facing to the seam allowance. This will keep the facing from rolling out in your dress. Press the facing down. Now that our straps and facings are sewn on our side back panels, we can attach the center back panel. Fold the strap down and lift up the facings on both pieces. Line up the shirred panel to your side back panel with the right sides together, lining up the finished top edge of the shirring to the edge of your side back panel. Work your way down, pinning the panel in place, matching up those raw edges. Fold the facing over to encase the top of the shirred panel. Readjust your pin to catch all the layers. We'll then sew from the top down to the hem. Repeat on the other side. You can finish the edge now that this is sewn. I'm going to send mine through my serger. You could also use a zigzag. This is what it looks like once the edges are done. Flip the facing over and pull the strap to finish the edge. This is what it'll look like finished on the back. Now the whole back of our dress is complete with that stretchy panel. I've put together the center front as well. The side fronts, the center front of the bodice, as well as the 3 skirt pieces. Once that front is completed, we can attach the straps before adding the facing and finishing the dress. Line up the straps to your strap lines on the front piece. Next, we'll face the front. For this pattern piece, my facing is a partial facing. I'll line it up to the neckline and then sew the underarms with a turn. Like the previous facing pieces, I've already finished the edge with a serge. Now we can take this to the machine and sew it. I sewed it just like that back facing where I sewed it with a 5/8 seam allowance, pressed it, clipped it, and then understitched it. Now that our front and back are finished, we can do the side seams. I'm using the same technique I did for the side back seams, lining up the side seams, then flipping over that facing and pinning into place. Be sure to line up your waistline as well. Depending on how stretchy your back panel is, you may not need a side zipper. But if you want to put in a side zipper for ease of putting it on, now is the time to add that side zipper before finishing the other side seam. I sewed one side seam and this is how it looks finished. Here's the dress almost completed with a side seam finished and that back panel in place. The next step would be adding that side seam invisible zipper and doing the hem. For more tips, tricks, and tutorials, sign up for our email newsletter at dittopatterns.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel.